All right, here's something you may not hear or see on TV. Earlier this week, Brittany Glass and the KSL Investigates team brought us a story about families scammed after signing up for prepaid funeral services, something they thought would make life easier for their families. You'd think so.
Yeah, but more than 100 families paid a Logan funeral home for services in advance. Over $700,000 in all, nearly gone. And there isn't much those families can do now to get that money back. So in an interview you're only going to see right here on KSL+, Kurt Soph, a member of the Utah Funeral Service Licensing Board, explains what you need to do when pre-planning for a funeral.
Make sure you have more than one person with you if you're going to go make these decisions. A second or third set of eyes and ears is always good. Stop by a funeral home and ask questions. Ask, do you provide advanced plans or pre-need funeral plans? Can I make my funeral plan without paying you any money? And if they say no, then I would highly question, because you can make a plan, and if you have alternative funding, wonderful. We're happy to put those on file and keep them. We have many. If I want to prepay or pre-fund, I would ask, how and where are my funds that I pay you going to be kept, and by whom? Give me the name, give me the location. With our phones now, we're able to sit in the offices and we ask and invite people, say, here's where your funds will be. You're welcome to look them up right now on your phone. Look at their AM Best rating, look at their location, see that they've been in business for an extended period of time and that they're providing funding for multiple funeral homes. The same is true with a bank. You should be able to call the bank and say, I'm here with XYZ Funeral Home. Do they have a trust account with you that follows the rules of trust? Are you the trustee? Who's the trustee? You know, and I know sometimes you got to know the questions to ask, but where's my money is an easy one. And I think if you don't get a satisfactory answer, you need to leave. You need to leave, because you should find answers to your questions.
Well, Brittany Glass is here with some tips that she didn't get to elaborate in her story, which is what we're here to do on KSL+. Specifically, the different ways that you can prepay for the funerals and what you should know about doing something like that.
Yeah, and Kurt really, I thought he did a really good job of kind of giving us those tips, because I don't know about you guys, I didn't know a ton about prepaid funeral services to begin with. Right. It's something that a lot of people do. A lot of adults actually prepay for their parents' funeral so that they don't have to think about it down the road. And so it's a really interesting process, but it's also kind of complicated. There's a lot of ways that you can sign up. Usually you sign up with a funeral home. So you find a funeral home that you know and trust, and from there you can decide one of two ways to fund that plan. You can either go with a trust or you can go with an insurance policy. So there are a number of differences between those two. And again, they're kind of complicated, but one isn't better than the other necessarily. But ultimately, when you're working with a trust, it's actually the funeral home that controls more of the deposit. And then if you're working with an insurance policy, it's the consumer. So I can, for example, move an insurance policy to a different funeral home if I decide that I'm probably going to live out the rest of my life in a different state and I want to sign up there. It's transferable, and there's no penalty for changing, for moving.
Right,
but
okay.
If you sign up with a trust, there can be a penalty of up to 25% of the corpus of the trust, which means all the money that ultimately was deposited and then any interest earned on top of it, 25% the funeral home can say, I want to keep that because you're moving away from me. Wow. So that's something to consider when you go about doing a prepaid funeral plan. There are a lot of similarities as well. Ultimately, both a trust and an insurance policy, they have to basically, they have 10 business days to put that deposit into the place that it's supposed to go. So the funeral home should be doing its job to make sure that, hey, your money is safe and it's where it's supposed to be within 10 business days. And then a big difference between trusts and insurance policies is that ultimately, because we're talking about a trust, that's AKA bank, right? Interest is taxed. So you'll get a lot of elderly people who've, signed up for these prepaid funeral plans who will get a 1099, and ultimately someone has to pay for that interest earned on that tax. So they need to be aware of that as well.
Right. It kind of seems, looking at those two lists, maybe insurance might be the better, easier way to go for families.
You know, I think that it's really a personal decision, right? And a lot of people, there are other people, maybe not so much journalists, who are more comfortable with financial things, financial matters and investments, and maybe a trust account is better for them. I know that a lot of funeral homes across the state of Utah, they do go more on the insurance side of things.
All right.
So it just depends, but ultimately, yeah, one's not worse than the other necessarily, but I think maybe an insurance policy is at least more consumer friendly.
Yes, and we appreciate you breaking down those options for us, Brittany. Thank you for your reporting,
Absolutely.
and thanks for joining us.